By 270 BC, the dust had finally settled from the wars of Alexander the Great's successors, leaving the eastern Mediterranean divided among a handful of new Macedonian dynasties. This map shows the two massive Hellenistic blocks that emerged from that fallout. In blue, we have Ptolemaic Egypt, and in gold, the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid territory was staggering in its scale. It stretched from the Aegean Sea all the way across the Near East, deep into Central Asia. Compared to that massive landmass, Ptolemaic Egypt was geographically constrained, tightly concentrated along the Nile River and the immediate coastline. Yet, over the next 2 centuries, the resource-rich Seleucid state dissolved. It collapsed into dynastic fratricide, fracturing into disconnected warring factions. Meanwhile, the Ptolemies maintained unbroken control over a massive native populace, pulling all regional influence inward toward Alexandria. Historian John D. Granger categorizes these two distinct models of rule. He defines the Ptolemaic system as a unitary state and the Seleucid Empire as a ramshackle state. The Ptolemies ensured their survival by engineering a unitary system designed to exploit and dismantle the structural vulnerabilities of their rivals. To understand how the Ptolemies achieved this, we have to look at their baseline operational problem. They were a foreign ruling class trying to establish legitimacy over a massive native majority. Relying strictly on military occupation is expensive and economically unsustainable for long-term dynastic stability. To solve this, Ptolemy I and II engaged in systemic ideological engineering. They manipulated religious architecture to manufacture consent. First, they adopted the traditional status of the pharaoh. This secured the immediate loyalty and bureaucratic compliance of the native Egyptian population. But that title held zero ideological weight for the Greco-Macedonian Ontit, who formed the core of the military and the state administration. The solution was a specific theological concept known as sunanoi theoi, or gods who share the temple. This syncretism successfully merged Greek and Egyptian worship practices, placing the Ptolemaic rulers directly alongside the traditional gods in a single state-sponsored ruler cult. By 280 BC, they formalized this with the creation of the Ptolemaic Festival, a massive cross-cultural event honoring Ptolemy I. This religious architecture was an act of political technology. It bypassed cultural divisions to forge a singular, centralized loyalty directly to the crown. That ideological cohesion was paired with a second pillar of the unitary state, monumental physical infrastructure. Approaching Alexandria by sea was notoriously dangerous. As we can see along the North African coastline, the flat, inconspicuous shores and shallow, submerged reefs posed a severe hazard to maritime trade. The Pharos of Alexandria was commissioned as a direct, state-funded solution to secure the capital's economic lifeline. This required a staggering investment from the royal treasury, taking 12 years to build at a total cost of 800 talents of silver. Arab historians tell us the lighthouse had 3 tiers, a square base, an octagonal middle, and a cylindrical top, reaching over 100 meters. At its apex, a massive mirror reflected sunlight by day, and a fire illuminated the night. This navigational safety turned Alexandria into the unavoidable gateway for Mediterranean trade. By securing the harbor against wrecks, the state effectively funneled regional commerce into a single point of collection, concentrating immense wealth into the royal treasury. Together, ideological ruler cults and monumental infrastructure like the pharaohs functioned as dual engines. They generated the impenetrable internal cohesion and massive wealth required to maintain the unitary state. With their internal economy secure, the Ptolemies turned that wealth outward, fueling a century-long geopolitical conflict known as the Syrian Wars. The primary battleground between the two empires was Koile, Syria, a narrow geographic choke point on the eastern Mediterranean coast. Because Hellenistic diplomatic treaties typically expired upon the death of a signatory king, these conflicts erupted roughly once per generation. Throughout the entire 3rd century BC, the highly centralized Ptolemaic defensive system in Koile, Syria, successfully repelled repeated Seleucid advances. The Ptolemaic kings looked beyond the border, targeting a fundamental structural flaw in the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid state was definitively ramshackle. Across its vast territory, it lacked both centralized ideological cohesion and the unifying physical infrastructure that anchored Egypt. The Ptolemies used their immense treasury to exploit this weakness, systematically funding Seleucid dynastic pretenders to spark endless civil wars. We see this tactic clearly in 152 BC, during the insurrection of the pretender Alexander Balis against the sitting Seleucid king Demetrius I. Ptolemy VI actively armed Balis, supplying mercenaries and financial backing to launch a rebellion. He also provided Ptolemaic naval backing based at the city of Ptolemais, allowing Balis to push his forces aggressively up the Phoenician coast. Once the Seleucid state was sufficiently fractured by this infighting, Ptolemy VI marched his own professional army directly into Syria in 147 BC. The Ptolemaic strategy weaponized Seleucid succession crises, turning internal instability into a deployable tool of conquest. These relentless dynastic wars ultimately hollowed out the Seleucid Empire. By 63 BC, the state had completely dissolved, its borders continuously shrinking as peripheral territories broke away. The shattered remains of the Seleucid territories were finally annexed by the expanding Roman Republic, wiping the gold off the map. The Seleucid collapse was the inevitable result of a ramshackle structure systematically dismantled by a century of Ptolemaic interference. While the Seleucid Empire vanished, the physical legacy of the Ptolemaic Unitary state endured. In 1994, an archaeological team led by Jean-Yves Empereur discovered the physical remains of the lighthouse on the floor of Alexandria's eastern harbor. These massive granite blocks, weighing up to 60 tons, outlasted the Hellenistic empires that commissioned them. Even after earthquakes brought the tower down, those stones were repurposed in 1480 to build the medieval citadel of Qaitbay, sitting exactly on the original footprint of the Pharaohs. In the architecture of hegemony, geopolitical survival ultimately favors the deeply integrated unitary system over the sprawling ramshackle expanse.